In today's weather, Hurricane Helene, now entering the Gulf of Mexico and forecast to be perhaps one of the most significant storms of 2024, aside from Beryl, which caused extensive damage across Houston back in July. Welcome to Forecast Lab. We've got a very busy 48 hours ahead of us. If you haven't joined this program before, I am Tim Vasquez. I was an Air Force forecaster for many years, worked typhoon situations at the Korea Theater Forecast Unit in Seoul. Also worked at Dias Air Force Base, Tonopah Test Range, and even overseas in Europe and Africa. I wrote Digital Atmosphere, wrote the Storm Chaser Handbook, and a bunch of other forecasting books. So you're getting some of the best information available on YouTube. So let us dive right in. So to start out with, the hurricane well to the south in the southern Gulf of Mexico. We've got a push of cold air moving through the Gulf Coast area. Temperatures back behind it in the lower 80s and even a few 70s in the mid-Mississippi River Valley. All of that driven by this anticyclone across the central U.S., the flow rapidly returning to downslope conditions and lee-side troughing in Montana and Wyoming. You can see temperatures well up into the 90s. We've got 97 in Wyoming this afternoon. We've got 90s all the way into Saskatchewan. However, a new Pacific front moving inland across the northwestern U.S., bringing showers and even a bit of severe weather to southeastern British Columbia. The upper tropospheric flow at 250 millibars does show a polar front jet running pretty much eastward across the North Pacific. This is a high index EPO pattern. There is strong momentum coming into the West Coast area, a large long-wave ridge through the central U.S., and then on the East Coast we've got this troughing running through James Bay into the Great Lakes and down into Kentucky and Arkansas. Got this occlusion sitting over the boot heel of Missouri and more ridging as we go out to the east. And of course down to the south, not really much evidence of that at 250 millibars, but that is where our hurricane is located. And there it is on the infrared satellite imagery, some vigorous convection off of the Yucatan Peninsula. Cuba located here, the Yucatan right there, and Florida to the northeast. So this will be tracking into the Gulf tonight and through the day tomorrow. And let's check that out on visible imagery, because that during the daytime is quite spectacular as well. And there it is, definitely a spiral appearance to that. Still, it is dominated by a central dense overcast. You can see it's pretty much filled. No evidence of an eye just yet, but numerous spiral bands all the way into the Gulf of Mexico. And there is our Dvorak enhancement curve. This is infrared imagery. This shows a central dense overcast. No indication of the eye just yet, but I would expect that to start taking shape over the next 12 hours. Already we do have a symmetric appearance to this cloud field. The latest information on Helene at 8 p.m. Eastern has 85-mile-an-hour winds, pressure dropping to 974 millibars and moving north at 12 miles an hour. The 8 p.m. Eastern update also has no significant change in the track, pretty much making landfall east of Apalachicola in western Appalachia Bay, then moving into western Georgia. Note that even as it approaches Columbus, Georgia, it is still at hurricane strength. And there is significant potential for flooding rains as it moves inland from Apalachicola, Tallahassee, all the way into Atlanta and the Blue Ridge Mountains. Let's look at that forecast from the deterministic GFS. This is the highest resolution version of the GFS. The ensembles are run at lower resolution. This deterministic model does tend to do pretty well. It's one of the best tools that we have, so let's take a look. Running that into tonight, we see that moving north. I would not take the values, the pressure values in here too literally, because there is some smoothing to make these graphics look presentable. But you do see the center pretty much due south of Apalachicola tomorrow morning. Then we go into the afternoon. This is going to be about 5 p.m. Eastern, starting to approach Appalachia Bay near peak intensity. And you can see that the trend on the pressures is dropping. Even though there's smoothing going on, it does continue to fall very strong as it moves into the Appalachia Bay area. The official National Hurricane Center track, of course, a little bit west of the GFS, and then the remains move into Georgia overnight. Here we have the peak winds during the entire run. Very interesting product here. Now, it does bring a second hurricane into the central Gulf area about 200, 250 hours out. We're not going to worry about that. That's very questionable. But this is Helene moving into Florida and into Georgia. Now, you might look at these curves and think that there's wobbling or something weird going on. This is just an artifact of the limited output resolution. We only get the output panels every 3 hours or 6 hours, however they do this. So there is some missing data in between. You just have to kind of blend that together mentally. But you can see the overall picture bringing very high winds inland. Now, of course, I do see all the time people like to throw all of the forecast models and post it on Twitter or whatever. This is absolutely useless. You don't know which products are inaccurate, which ones are favored. Some of these we don't even use at all. And I think this is a good one to start with, just the basic track down there at the bottom. Let's take a look at the official NHC track, and we'll zoom in a little bit on that. We do see that coming inland near Apalachicola, maybe just a little bit to the east there. There is a little bit of rounding that you need to add, so probably comes on shore right about there, according to NHC. We add the official deterministic GFS model, basically what you saw earlier. That's a little bit further east than the NHC forecast. And if we correct it for the current storm motion, we get something like this, heading more towards Tallahassee. The interpolated ensemble data from the GFS, shown in that purple line right there, tracking into far western Georgia. And what you see right there, that's a mean position of all the ensemble members. There's the European deterministic track in yellow, going a little bit further to the east, but very similar to the uncorrected GFS track. We add the interpolated hurricane analysis and forecasting system. That's very similar to the corrected GFS tracks. And there we've added all the variable consensus models pretty much right along the track of the National Hurricane Center forecast. So the western Appalachia Bay area it is. One important factor is going to be the fast forward speed of the storm. It's going to be making landfall at about 25 miles an hour. It will be a high-end Category 3 storm. However, that fast forward speed has a couple of effects. Frictional effects and loss of latent heat take a while to kick in, about 6 to 12 hours before you see a significant decline. By that time, the storm will be 100 to 200 miles inland, so that means the hurricane winds are going to penetrate quite a distance inland into Georgia. Also, the combination of forward speed with the existing wind field means that the ground relative winds on the left will be diminished and enhanced on the right side. Assuming the strength at landfall is 125 miles an hour, that means that if you're on the ground, you're going to be looking at 150 miles an hour for sustained winds on the right side of the storm and 100 miles an hour on the left side. Effectively, that takes the storm up by one category, although we don't really take that figure into account when we come up with the storm strength. That shows some of the complexity of using a simple index like Category 3 for the storm. Another factor is the extensive width on this storm. This is in the upper 90th percentile as far as the forecast radii of the tropical storm force winds. You can see that on this 850 millibar chart for later Thursday. We've got 60-knot winds across pretty much all of Florida. It's going to have quite a punch there on the left side as it moves inland. A lot of areas from Apalachicola out to Gainesville will be very hard hit. And you can see as it moves north, some very strong winds coming into Georgia and South Carolina. And then we get into problems with rainfall, 5 to 10 inch rains likely across the Blue Ridge Mountains, and that will be spreading westward into the Ohio River Valley for Friday. So there's the extent of all the watches and warnings. We've got hurricane warnings from Tampa all the way to Apalachicola and extending quite a distance into southwestern Georgia. Overall, I'm concerned because of the extent and strength of that wind field. And of course, pine forest, pines are very brittle. I think that we do have the potential to see some widespread and prolonged power outages throughout this hurricane warning area. between Tallahassee and Gainesville, and possibly some distance inland. I think the effects will resemble somewhat of a derecho scenario. How far inland, I'm not really sure. I don't know how hardened the power grid is, but I think there will be some fairly significant problems. My advice, if you're anywhere in northern Florida, southern Georgia, far southeastern Alabama, even South Carolina, make sure you have everything you need in case of a prolonged power outage. Do not be one of those people that goes out and buys a bunch of perishables like milk and bread.
I gotta get the bread and milk.
What I strongly recommend is canned foods like soup, stews, that kind of thing. Canned beans are very good. They've got a good amount of protein and not just a bunch of carbs. Canned meats, Spam, corned beef, that kind of thing. Peanut butter is a big one, makes a great snack. Crackers, instant oatmeal, nuts and seeds and granola bars. And make sure your water supply is intact. Fill up some containers. Stock pots and other pots that you have in your kitchen are great for that. Don't forget pets. They need water also, and food. Also your medical supplies. And fill the bathtub for a last resort source of water. You can flush the toilet with that if the water pressure goes out. Make sure you have a good stopper on the bathtub, because I've had our bathtub leak from poorly made stoppers. In the northeastern U.S., things are fairly quiet this afternoon. We do have some extensive cloud cover associated with warm advection, bringing up moisture from the tropics, and of course we've got the close proximity of an upper-level trough in Ontario. Nuisance coastal flooding continues from New York City all the way down to Chesapeake Bay. Due to prolonged easterly winds and king tides, the Annapolis, Maryland area located right about there, under a coastal flood warning, inundation could be up to 1 foot. In the northern plains, under the influence of a large anticyclone, pretty much centered on Iowa. They're looking for 80s this afternoon, but it will be a cool night tonight. Dry air and strong radiational cooling will drop those temperatures down into the 40s from eastern Colorado to Nebraska, Iowa, and Wisconsin. However, as you go west, some very warm conditions as we have downslope flow off of the Rockies. At this hour, we have 90s all the way from the Black Hills into eastern Montana, and as you go north, we get 90 degrees all the way up to Prince Albert. In the southwestern U.S., continued hot in the deserts, looking for a high of 111 at Phoenix, 103 at Tucson, and 100 at Las Vegas. The satellite imagery is indicative of monsoon flow, although I did take a look at the dew points. Those are still in the 20s and 30s, with a few 40s down in southeastern Arizona. Just enough to maybe get a few elevated storms going around Tucson and, maybe out around San Simon. However, it is still fairly dry, and this is not a classic monsoon pattern. In the northwestern U.S., new Pacific front making progress very rapidly to the east, moving off of the Cascades into the interior. Due to strong pressure gradients, we have a blowing dust advisory this afternoon and evening for eastern Washington from Kennewick and Hermiston to Moses Lake and Spokane. Winds will be 25 miles an hour, gusting to 50. The main problem will be localized blowing dust off of the crop fields. Also a wind advisory across that same area extending all the way down towards the Dalles. A high wind warning overnight into Thursday for northwestern Montana on the eastern slopes of Glacier National Park into the I-25 corridor. North of Great Falls, we could see west winds gusting to 60 miles an hour tomorrow. And there's a look at that mess. We go from the anticyclone on the plains to the lee side troughing, the strong pressure gradients in the northern Rockies, and of course the strong Pacific front. As you go further to the west, we've got the remains of a typhoon off of British Columbia. That's well off to the edge of the map. That's the remains of Typhoon Pulasan that will be approaching the British Columbia coast for tomorrow. They have wind warnings. They're expecting gusts up to 80 miles an hour. And as we move further north into Alaska, things fairly quiet. Temperatures in the 40s, those summertime 60s and 70s and 80s, those are gone. However, we do see that the thermal gradients are quite weak, especially in the Gulf of Alaska, so we're only looking at small craft advisories in that area. The Canadian Arctic, looking pretty typical for this time of year, not seeing teens or 20s just yet. Most of those are going to be well up to the north. We've got 30s and looks like a corridor of warm advection coming up from Hudson Bay into the central Arctic region. As we go south, yeah, it is a stormy day there in British Columbia. We've got wind warnings in southeastern British Columbia through the Kootenays and along the Canadian Rockies west of Calgary, Banff National Park, all the way down to the U.S. border. Also have a severe thunderstorm watch in the southeastern part of the province due to gusty outflow and flash flood debris. Hot weather, as we mentioned, in Saskatchewan. And as we go out to Ontario, we've got a severe thunderstorm watch from Barrie to Parry Sound and Petawawa. Rain, hail, and isolated tornadoes could be expected there. That's going to be near this small triple point. So let's put the maps into motion, starting with the picture for tonight. These are not computer-derived, and these are not from the Weather Service or anything like that. This is from me. I used to be an analyst and forecaster in the Air Force, and you're seeing an actual diagnosis of the model output. Now, this is based on the GFS run, and of course, models do fail, or they may not capture a lot of the details. The hurricane may be tracking further to the left than shown here, but, just take that into account. Let's move into tomorrow, and we see that hurricane starting to appear on the map. That's 7 a.m. Central Time. We go into early afternoon and into the evening. So now we're looking at landfall there in Appalachee Bay, possibly further to the west. A new Pacific system moving into the Dakotas and into Wyoming. The Northeast will have a cold pattern overnight, temperatures in the 40s and 50s. That will continue through the entire period due to an endless succession of cool Canadian air masses moving through. And last but not least, an enhanced risk of severe in southeastern Georgia and a slight risk from Orlando through Gainesville up to South Carolina. That is almost entirely due to an enhanced tornado risk. There's a 1 in 10 chance of a significant tornado within 25 miles of any given point in southeastern Georgia, and that's due to that strong shear in the lower atmosphere and that corridor of very strong warm advection. So pay close attention to the warnings and watches, even if you're not directly in the track of this hurricane. In the southwestern U.S., another hot one in the deserts, looking for 110 at Phoenix. Then we go into Friday. The hurricane continues inland and weakens into a tropical storm across the Blue Ridge Mountains and into eastern Tennessee. An extensive area of precipitation spreading into the Ohio River Valley and into the central Mississippi River Valley. And it appears it transitions to an extratropical system. Meanwhile, out in the western U.S., Phoenix rises to 112 as summer heat continues to rule the southwest with an iron fist. Looking for 102 at Las Vegas and 112 at Death Valley. Then we go into Saturday. A cool air mass in place, wet bulbing, dynamic cooling, dropping those highs into the upper 60s in many areas. Meanwhile, out west, it gets even worse for Phoenix. They're looking for 113. The all-time record for September in Phoenix is 118, so we're a ways from that. And it gets toasty as well in the San Joaquin Valley, looking for mid-90s from Sacramento to Bakersfield. But I don't see any 100s in there anytime during the forecast period, so that's certainly some good news. As we go into Sunday, start to see a little bit of warming there in the Mississippi River Valley. Temperatures rise into the 70s. In the southwestern U.S., some moderation of that heat. We go into Monday, a very strong Canadian, West Canadian, and North Pacific frontal system moving into the northern Rockies region, into Wyoming, South Dakota, and North Dakota. So this may be our first really big cold air outbreak of the central U.S. for this fall. So that'll bring some cool temperatures down all the way to Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana for October 1st. And then we get to the end of the period, looks like another reinforcing shot of cold air. So it is going to definitely start to feel like fall. And I don't really see any sign of summer, although some parts of the southwestern U.S. will continue to remain kind of warm. There's a third Alberta clipper dropping south, but looks like that doesn't really do much. And then, of course, the GFS trying to go for another hurricane, but that is a long ways out. The Gulf could be active, but we just don't really have any good data to go on, so we'll just kind of revisit this next week. Another Pacific front moving out to the west coast, so active there as well, and that completes the forecast. So let me go ahead and get this prepared and uploaded on the old YouTube. We are closing in on the 10,000 subscriber mark, so if you haven't subscribed, please do that. I would like to definitely see us at 10,000. And remember, if you're a Patreon contributor, you not only get the Monday videos delivered straight to your box or your app, you get the peace of mind knowing that you're supporting this channel. So please bear that in mind. And if you're already a Patreon subscriber, thank you very much. Hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday. Take care if you're in the southeastern U.S. I will consider probably going back on tomorrow to do another episode. Obviously, it's going to be a very busy day tomorrow, so maybe we'll just change Friday to Thursday for our schedule. All right, we'll see you back here soon, maybe tomorrow. Have a great night and stay safe. Bye-bye.